On this week's show, each year as we approach 9/11, we remember that 3,000 lives were lost on that terrible Tuesday in 2001. Since then, what liberties have we lost to government overreach, corruption, and abuse? But first, despite President Trump's bluster, is the USA losing its leadership position in the world order? Have we already lost it? I'm Holland Cook in Washington. This is The Big Picture on RT America. Implementing the Paris Climate Agreement, low carbon, sustainable development, 5G technology shared with all partners, all righteous goals that the world seeks from a leading superpower, and all elements of a comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Russia. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, our president has pulled us out of the JCPOA nuke treaty, imposed sanctions on Iran and tariffs on China, and he abides the regime change meddling in Venezuela and elsewhere. Is this erratic administration, plus emerging Eurasian collaboration, the perfect storm that can sink the U.S. dollar as the world's preeminent currency and our leadership among nations? Let's ask RT defense expert, longtime Pentagon official Michael Maloof, and Peter Schiff, chief economist and global strategist at Euro-Pacific Capital. Welcome both. And Michael, during the recent G7 meeting, I couldn't resist the temptation. I muted my TV, and to me, the body language was very telling. Is it my imagination, or are other world leaders merely tolerating Trump's buffoonery?
Well, they're trying to be polite, to answer your question, but on the other hand, they are looking in other directions. They see that the United States is going it alone with its America First approach, which is basically controlled by the neoconservatives in this government, and as a result of using economic warfare through sanctions and tariff battles with almost every country in the world these days, they're looking for alternatives, and we're beginning to see Europe, our Western partners there, beginning to look more eastward as a consequence. And I think as a result of all of this, and with a benchmark of the Trump administration, as you point out, dropping out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement in May last year, that really set the tone for an acceleration of getting out from under the dominance of the U.S. dollar and the Western financial system, such as SWIFT and what have you, and looking for alternative approaches. And what we're seeing here is this acceleration. We're seeing Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, India, Pakistan, the BRICS countries of Brazil, China, Russia, and even South Africa beginning now to look more eastward in this pursuit. And it's not stopping. It's accelerating. And as a result of sanctions that are being put on our European friends, they're looking more eastward as a consequence. So this is beginning to evolve, but it's accelerating more rapidly now.
Well, Peter, when I hit the mute button during the G7, admittedly what I am observing is subjective, but numbers are objective. Measurably, how is the USA's stature faring under this mercurial president?
Well, first of all, the problems that the United States have, are way before Donald Trump. I mean, the real issue for the dollar and what's going to sink the dollar is our own fiscal profligacy. And these large deficits, budget deficits and trade deficits, were here long before we elected Donald Trump. Now, he has not done anything about it. In fact, the deficits are getting bigger, both trade and budget deficits. What has enabled this over the years has been the world's willingness to hold U.S. dollars as the primary reserve currency and to continue to loan money to Americans and to the U.S. government so we can continue to live beyond our means. We can have enormous government programs that we don't pay for, and we can consume all sorts of goods that we don't manufacture. And we can live in an economy based on consumption and debt without having to save or produce. The world has done that for us. And I think this is what's going to come to an end. I think we're going to see a collapse in the value of the dollar. And when the dollar does collapse, America's power is going to dissipate. And Americans are going to have to deal with reality that we've hollowed out our infrastructure. We've been living above our means, and there's going to be a day of reckoning for these years of excesses. Unfortunately, Trump didn't start this, but he may be the fall guy. Who knows?
And it is compound interest that's eating it away. You said when, not if the dollar collapses, Peter. You think it's inevitable?
Of course it's inevitable, because we're not going to stop with the fiscal profligacy until it collapses. As long as the world is willing to keep lending Americans money, we'll keep spending it, particularly the government. So the only thing that's going to cause a change is going to be a crisis. And it's going to be a dollar crisis. It's going to be a sovereign debt crisis. It should have already happened. But we've been able to kick the can down the road for many, many years. But the problem with all the can kicking is the underlying problems have gotten so much worse. So now it's a much bigger problem that we're going to have to deal with.
Michael, have the Iran sanctions backfired?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually caused the people to be more emboldened to support their government and actually despise the United States. But for the government itself, it is looking more eastward. It has actually entered into some in recent days, in fact, some very serious oil and gas negotiations and agreements with China that absolutely undercut the sanctions that Trump is trying to impose, and they're going to be dealing not in dollars, they're going to be dealing in renminbis and tomans, reals, whatever the currencies are, and they're looking for alternative baskets of currencies to work with, and in exchange, they don't have to change their government, they don't have to change their culture or anything like that we've insisted upon by joining the Western system of you must adhere to democracy first. That doesn't exist in this alternative approach, and it's, as I said, accelerating as a consequence, and in very recent days.
Go ahead, Peter.
And well, in fact, the Chinese just entered into a long-term deal with Iran regarding building up their infrastructure in exchange for Iranian oil. Yeah. And the sanctions that we have been imposing around the world, this is simply giving the world yet another reason to look for an alternative to the U.S. dollar, which they should have been looking for a long time ago. But now, by flexing muscle that, we really shouldn't be flexing, we're in effect biting the hands that have been feeding us. And now they're questioning whether or not they should continue to do that. And so we have accelerated the process of the dollar's demise by antagonizing so many of the nations around the world that we really need to continue to hold the dollar. We keep talking about how, or Trump keeps talking about how, we've got the Chinese over a barrel, and they're somehow in a weaker bargaining position than we are, but we have far more to lose. Because the Chinese simply lose a customer that doesn't pay, right, and that they have to vendor finance. But we lose a banker, we lose a supplier. The Chinese have been propping up the U.S. economy. We have been screwing up the Chinese economy because in order to maintain this relationship, they have pursued reckless monetary policy. They have inflated bubbles. They have done things in order to artificially prop up the dollar so they can continue to sell products to people that really can't afford to buy them. Right. China should be developing trading relationships with countries that can produce the things that the Chinese citizens want so that trade is balanced. They can't run this enormous trade deficit with the United States or surplus with the United States. It is screwing up their economy.
Well, just this week, reporters asked the president if he was concerned that China holds so much U.S. debt. Here's his reply.
No, I'm not worried about it at all. They have approximately $1 trillion. That's a trickle compared to what we do, and plus interest rates are very low. We'll have no trouble. There's nothing anybody's going to be doing. We're in a very strong position, really strong position, probably in terms of refinancing the strongest position we've ever been in. Okay?
Well, to put it politely, businessman Trump was no stranger to refi. But, Peter, $1 trillion is 12 zeros. Is President Trump calling it a trickle a little too nonchalant about how deeply in debt we are and to whom?
Yeah, he's pretty much delusional. And, of course, when he talks about $1 trillion, that's just the Treasury debt. The Chinese hold a lot of U.S. dollar-denominated debt in addition to the Treasury debt. So it's a lot more than $1 trillion. And on the margin, that is a tremendous amount of money. If we lose Chinese lending, if the Chinese want to unload their dollar-denominated debt, President Trump seems to think there's an ample supply of lenders that really want that debt. I don't believe that they exist. I don't know that there's that many foolish people out there in the world that want to lend so much money to the U.S. at such a low rate of interest.
Right.
And, you know, once the thing turns around, what Trump forgets is that the national debt is not financed with, you know, 30-year treasuries. The majority of it is financed with short-term treasury bills that constantly mature. We have to roll over this debt all the time. And if foreigners finally lose confidence in our ability to repay our debts with money that actually has any value, the game is over. I mean, why do you think gold prices have moved above 1,500? People are losing confidence in the dollar. And, you know, you can't see it in the foreign exchange markets. The dollar hasn't really started to fall against other fiat currencies, but that's because all fiat currencies are falling against the dollar, against gold. But the strength of gold is showing an underlying weakness in the dollar that the Forex markets aren't showing yet, but they will.
Gotcha. Now, Michael, about China, the ancient Silk Road trade route linked to Asia with Europe, its modern-day renaissance, the Belt and Road Initiative will create what the Council of Foreign Relations calls a vast network of railways, energy pipeline, highways, and streamlined border crossings westward through the mountains, former Soviet republics, and southward to Pakistan and India and the rest of Southeast Asia, and that in addition to physical infrastructure, China plans to build 50 special economic zones, and that to accommodate expanding maritime traffic, China would invest in port development along the Indian Ocean from Southeast Asia all the way to East Africa. Michael, I don't hear anything about American greenbacks there, but dollars aside, how does this huge undertaking impact the USA's world stature?
Well, it's causing these other countries to basically isolate the United States. And as I said earlier, a lot of our European allies are doing the same. Germany, which is in a deep approaching a recession, it has to sell. I mean, these are all exporting countries. They need markets, and they're looking to China. And you mentioned the Silk Road. There's also the Eurasia Union that is also under Russia domain. And so you have Russia, China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries, which have become much more powerful as a consequence. Used to be an economic entity. Now it's becoming more of a military and political entity. And you have India, China, Pakistan, all of these countries coming together under this this package of elements that are coalescing almost at the same time, such as the Belt and Road Initiative by China, which is also going to be going in different directions, including Iran, through Russia, and through some of the former Soviet countries, which of Central Asia.
Well, President Xi's predecessor, Deng Xiaoping, had a mantra, hide your strength and bide your time. Peter, I'm almost out of time, so I need the short answer. But for all the short-term conniptions Trump's China tariffs are causing the stock market, I get the impression that time is on China's side, that culturally they have a longer-term pain point than American presidents who change every 4 years. How do you see this tariff war playing out quickly?
Well, I don't see it playing out very well, but I think the stock market has a lot more to worry about than the trade war. I think there are other problems that are much more important that are being ignored. This is a big, fat, ugly bubble. Donald Trump was right as a candidate, and the air is going to come out of this bubble regardless of what happens with the trade war.
So we're not surprised that gold is doing so well. Thank you, Peter Schiff and Michael Maloof.
Pleasure.
Coming up, when terrorists struck 18 years ago, clocks stopped. And did 9/11 unleash an enemy within? This is the big picture on RT America.
It's been 10 years since Crosstalk started to air. 10 years. I think it's time to shake things up. Maybe change the branding, maybe the format. Here's what I've been thinking about. Next season, all Brexit-related episodes filmed on an island. They have 10 experts fight it out for a trophy. What do you think? Okay, a more affordable option. 25 experts and 1 red rose. Another suggestion, geopolitical Jeopardy parody? No, political cookout, where we will literally roast the elites. Late night show. It's a rare format these days, and it's cheap. All you need is an old microphone and a printed banner. And if I actually agree with one of my guests, I can do this. Canned laughter, politics, gone wild, live music. Okay, Crosstalk is not about hype. It's about meaning. 10 years of talk, and still going strong.
Peter, if you want to change something, why don't we get rid of the bow tie?
No, that is too much.
Today, there are good terrorists and bad terrorists. The bad terrorists are those in Yemen, who the United States deems to be a threat. The good terrorists are those who are in Syria.
The CIA and the U.S. military were engaged in covert actions really throughout the world, where they were assassinating populist leaders, they were backing up right-wing military juntas, funding and arming death squads.
There's no hope of ending war because there's always a small cabal of people for whom war is really, really good business, good for profit.
Never forget where you were on September 11, 2001. In the anxious aftermath, what member of Congress would not vote for something called the USA Patriot Act? Only one U.S. Senator, Democrat Russ Feingold of Wisconsin, urging that even as America addresses the demanding security challenges before us, we must strive mightily also to guard our values and basic rights, and warning that preserving our freedom is one of the main reasons that we are now engaged in this new war on terrorism. We will lose that war without firing a shot if we sacrifice the liberties of the American people. Back to the future. Have the noble-sounding USA Patriot Act and post-9/11 government surveillance and enforcement tactics cost us the way of life our founders promised? Let's ask the author of Battlefield America, The War on the American People, and A Government of Wolves, the Emerging American Police State, constitutional attorney, Rutherford Institute president, syndicated columnist, and host of the podcast Freedom Under Fire, John W. Whitehead. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much, sir.
John, your book titles are provocative. Post 9/11, how is a government of wolves declaring war on the American people?
Well, actually, that term government of wolves comes from a quote by Edward R. Murrow, the great CBS commentator who fought McCarthyism in his day when the FBI was crashing into people's homes during the 1950s if they had some kind of leftist leanings or whatever they thought, and wrecking people's lives. People were committing suicide. And he made this statement. He said, a nation of sheep will beget a government of wolves. And what he was saying was, wake up, people. Get active in your government and stop allowing the government to, violate the Constitution. We have a beautiful Constitution. In it is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says the government is not supposed to be doing surveillance, watching us, or doing anything unless they have probable cause or some kind of reason for doing it. They were committing illegal activities. With the 9/11 and the Patriot Act, which allowed the FBI and the government to go into people's homes while they weren't there and download all the information on their laptops, their computers, listening on all the telephone calls, everything we're doing today. The NSA listening up to 100 million phone calls a year and recording them now. The post office is now photographing all of our mail, even opening some of it to see what we're doing. We've entered a state where the Constitution has become just basically a paper rag to the government. So we do have an enemy within, and that's a very paranoid government that we're dealing with here that's targeting people that I have defended for years. And some of the cases, we may want to talk briefly about a few of them, that show that if you say the wrong word today, you do the wrong picture on Facebook, Google, all these groups, Amazon has billion-dollar contracts with the government. They created all the intelligence clouds for the government. So you have a corporate state that's come together now, and they're watching everything we're doing.
You know, a techie nerd friend of mine told me that if a movie I've seen disappointed me, I should never email friends calling it a bomb. And in another interview of yours, I heard you speak of a client that the FBI busted based on a Facebook post. Talk about Operation Vigilant Eagle.
Operation Vigilant Eagle was leaked by the Wall Street Journal several years ago. And what it is, it's tracking, the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon tracked all returning soldiers to this country because they're considered possible terrorist threats. The case that we handled was a young Marine named Brandon Robb who had been jogging early one morning on the Saturday in Richmond, Virginia. And he got home and he was typing on his typewriter. And this is a decorated Marine, by the way. He captured weapons from the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. He diffused mines for the soldiers. Well, he came back. He was in Richmond, Virginia. He was typing one morning, and he hears a knock on the door. So he goes out, and he sees all these cars in his front yard, SWAT teams coming at him, people in plain clothes with black ties. They said they were the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and the police. And this is a man who did not own a weapon, by the way. The most dangerous thing he had in his house, he said, was a Perry knife to cut his fruit with in the morning. And he came to the front door and he said, "What's up?" And they said, "We're concerned about your Facebook posts." They had been watching everything he was doing. He was opposed to Barack Obama's executive orders. He was very vocal about it. He, in fact, said the president should be arrested for doing that. He was also a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. And the FBI was watching everything he was doing, recording it, and they considered him an extremist threat. He was jerked out of his home, arrested, thrown against the fence, cut his back. They took him to the local jail, where a psychiatrist gave him a 5-minute investigation. 5-minute investigation interview, and concluded that he had mental issues because he was a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. And he was directly put into a mental hospital. His mother called us pleading for our help. I went into court and filed a lawsuit. We got him out in a week. A judge said he shouldn't be there in the first place. What I learned, though, these are called civil commitments. 20,000 alone in Virginia.
Wow.
Annually. They're putting people in mental hospitals that are just disappearing. This is what I call the old, these are models that we've seen in former regimes where if you say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. But what I'm trying to tell people here and wake them up through my books and the work I do is that you're being watched. Be careful what you say on Facebook especially. You can get arrested and jerked out of your home and put in a mental hospital. They're saying up to 1.5 million people a year this happens to. Some statistics show that.
That's pretty scary, and we're not just being watched. You mentioned our phone calls. We know that they're at least being logged as metadata, possibly keyword scanned. Last week on this show, we talked about the Stingray device that acts like a cell tower and helps itself to our phones, thus our movements and our data. Anyone who leaves home today will be photographed, perhaps hundreds of times, by various camera systems, some government-operated, other closed circuits like in banks. Is it a stretch to think that somebody could hack into and knit together all this surveillance like we see depicted in the Jason Bourne movies? Is that happening now by the government?
Oh, it's happening now, yeah. And again, like Google works with China on their surveillance systems. Google actually has contracts with the NSA. Amazon works with the Pentagon. All of it's being watched. When you post pictures on Facebook, algorithms are created. What they're doing is they're trying to come up with predictive policing, which, by the way, scientists and professors that look at it, how it's been practiced in years, say it's very inaccurate. They're kind of come up with an idea now, Facebook. They're watching your emotions on your face. Are you distressed? Are you this? You're that? And they will directly report you to local authorities. And also, police departments across the country and working with Amazon and their Amazon recognition software program, collecting all your facial images. They're watching social media. They're knocking on people's door. They're called knock and talks now, where in the middle of the night, policemen will be knocking on your door. People have actually come to the door with an umbrella. An old fellow did, thinking it was robbers, and he got shot through the door. These things are happening in America. And by the way, let me tell you something. We've got a standing army. There are 80,000 SWAT team raids occurring annually in this country where kids are getting killed. Up to 500 dogs a day are being killed, adults. With police crashing through doors, 80% for mere warrant service, where a policeman used to show up at your door and knock on the door to give you that warrant. But people are getting killed today. So George Washington and the so-called founding fathers warned, do not have a standing army in America.
Well,
I don't know if you've seen it. Some of the police today are actually wearing camouflage when they show up at your door,
well,
like the people in Iraq.
John, all of that hand-me-down war hardware that has militarized the local police really rubs our nose in a long-ago warning from a president who, ironically, was our very first supreme Allied commander in Europe during World War II. And anyone who's watching this, who is younger than you and I, might get chills hearing this warning against the then burgeoning war industry. Listen.
We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Well, that'll give you chills. John, you served as a military officer, so you've seen this Pentagon spending spree from the inside out. You have written that our military spends $32 million per hour, and we hear about surplus tanks parked in the California desert and the $70 ballpoint pens. Now the president wants to divert several $billion from the Pentagon to build this wall along the Mexican border. Do you think they'll scrape by somehow?
I think they always scrape by somehow. The military-industrial complex, we call it, is very, very strong. Again, I'm a former military officer, and I've worked with former NSA agents and stuff, and they tell me that, listen, it's what we call the deep state. 2015, when the FBI leaked that memo, basically, or the Intercept, I think, got leaked it through a FOIA request, we found out that there's this deep state thing on the 7th floor under the State Department that they said runs everything. And that's really basically with former military generals, the billionaires, and all those things that run our government. And it's heavily influenced by money. As we see in our country today, it's a corporate complex, basically, and we're seen as data bits now. And I'll tell you one thing I've noticed with some of these policemen that are in their SWAT team gear, they see us as they would see people if they were over in Afghanistan as enemy combatants.
Ouch.
That's why you're seeing more people getting killed. I mean, we've had mass shootings since 2015. There have been over 300 people killed, but in that same period of time, the police have killed over 4,500 people in this country.
Yeah, John.
And no one talks about that.
I'm out of time, but I'm glad we talked about it. And John W. Whitehead, thank you for stepping into the big picture.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for watching The Big Picture. I'm Holland Cook in Washington. Back next week, same time. Meantime, question more.